When I grow up, I wanna be so tall, wanna stand up high to see it all.
This new generation of charter school has proven to be a safe bet and a boon for charter school companies.
If you could buy one thing right now, David, one type of asset in real estate, what would it be?
Well, probably the charter school business we said is our highest growth and most appealing segment right now of the portfolio. It's the most high in demand, it's the most recession resistant, and great opportunity set with 500 schools starting every year. It's a $2.5 billion opportunity set in rough measure annually.
One way that we try to understand things is to look at a map, and when we look at these underutilized schools, we see that they're surrounded by charters that are draining the traditional schools of students. So at the same time we hear about underutilized schools, we also hear talk of building more charters, which sounds about as contradictory as eliminating the...
Mr. Brunson,
Okay.
excuse me.
Charter schools are one of those sticky widgets in public education. Some people love them. Others see them as a threat. Many parents see them as a step up from public schools because charters often present themselves as a quasi-private alternative, where some students wear uniforms and the schools can have catchy names with words like academy and college prep. Originally, charter schools were alternative public schools started by parent groups who wanted a more direct involvement in their child's education. And for many, that model worked well. But that model has changed over the years. A current trend is charter schools run by private education management organizations, sometimes called EMOs or CMOs. About 40% of the country's 6,000 charter schools are run by these companies, and the trend is growing. As an example, about 80% of Michigan's charter schools are now privately run. Charters have always had a lot of latitude and autonomy in how they run their schools. There is little or no financial oversight from the public tax dollars they receive from us to run the schools. For example, they get to set their own curriculum, their own enrollment criteria, and their own discipline standards. Many charter school teachers aren't required to be certified and are consequently paid much less than their public school colleagues. And not every kid can attend a charter school. There's evidence that some schools can make it very difficult for students to get in if they don't fit the mold. A Reuters investigation found at some schools, the enrollment period was only a few hours each year. At this charter school located in a wealthy suburb of Chicago, parents were required to become investors in the school. There were benefits to this investment, including naming rights for the donor who met the $10 million price tag. Charter schools don't have to provide many of the services required by traditional public schools, like, for instance, free and reduced lunch. Most do not provide transportation. And although charter schools are required by law to provide special education, investigations have shown that students with special needs are often discouraged from enrolling and counseled out of charter schools. In Illinois, charter schools even have their own lobby group.
Instead of charters being started by teachers and parents in a community, they're being started and funded with public money through these large charter chains that are large business conglomerates. Some are for-profit, some are non-profit, but they all, if you look at their boards of directors, tend to be full of hedge fund managers and investment bankers. The education market is seen as a tremendous market.
Whenever they're challenged in court, or before the National Labor Relations Board, they say, we are not a public school, we are not subject to the public laws, we're private corporations that contract with the government. I'm convinced, I've seen this now happen time and again on the West Coast, on the East Coast, and in the Midwest, where the charter response to any situation is, we're not public schools. But when they go looking for the money, they're public schools.
I would be lying if I said I'm not concerned about ensuring quality within the education reform movement. Whenever you have something new, something innovative, and people are trying to get involved with it, you're going to have folks who get involved who have an opportunistic bent to them, whose interests aren't really in the students or the families, but how can I make a buck off of this?
Charter schools and the whole school choice movement have flourished because of a subtle yet significant change in the language. One short phrase reframes the entire conversation about public school funding. Per pupil revenue. It's the foundation for every school choice initiative and a free market catchphrase. Here's what it means. Traditionally, public schools have been funded by need. For example, if a school has a high population of children living below the poverty line, more money might be sent to that school for free and reduced lunches. The same would hold true for schools that need more special education teachers or English as a second language teachers. The kids who need this extra help are simply more expensive to educate. In contrast, the free market approach to school funding is one of simple arithmetic. Per pupil revenue equally divides the overall budget by the number of students in the district. Every student gets the same amount of money, regardless of their needs. This also puts the idea into parents' heads that this is their money, and they can spend it however they want on their child's education. The money follows the child. When a child leaves a public school for, say, a charter, he depletes that overall public school's budget by taking the money with him. Critics argue the kids who need the most help, the most expensive to educate, are now being left behind in the underfunded public schools.
When the state allocates funds, it was never meant to say that it costs the same thing to educate every student. And any money that leaves those schools hurts our children, and it hurts the community.
Online schools make money by replicating a standardized internet curriculum, selling it over and over again, and collecting a majority of per pupil revenue for every student who signs up. It's a very profitable model.
At the time when the corporate chair of the committee was an executive with a for-profit online vendor, and in fact, two of the corporate members were both for two different companies that were for-profit online education vendors. What they created was this model legislation, the Model Virtual Education Bill, that would allow a state to create charter schools that had no bricks and mortar, that were all online.
That legislation says that a virtual school, meaning online education at your house, is paid the same amount per pupil as a school that has bricks and mortar and lunch ladies and athletic teams, student councils, heating, lighting, air conditioning, the same amount per pupil as a school that provides all of those services. And the difference is profit. When you look at K-12, one of the things you see is that this is an entity that was spawned in part by Wall Street traders in the first place. That money comes out of our public schools and goes in the hands of a Wall Street traded firm who's not accountable to you, whose investors may be in the US or abroad, whose bottom line is the bottom line and not necessarily whether your students, your kids perform well or not. And they're paid handsomely out of your tax dollars. So when I looked at K-12, one of the companies that has been part of ALEC, they're paying their CEO, K-12 is paying its CEO nearly $500,000 a year in salary, and he's received nearly $20 million in stock. That's almost all at public expense.
Corporations and people who have a lot of money believe because they have a lot of money, they got smart. You know what I mean? And I don't know if they're smart or not smart, but they have a lot of money. And very often they come in and try to dominate a school district. Education is not a business model. It's just not. It's a different thing, but you're dealing with the brain.
Overall, results of school choice free market reforms are mixed at best. The National Education Policy Center, an academic research organization and part of the University of Colorado, released a report on online schools. The study shows that online students lag far behind their public school counterparts. A study on charter schools by Stanford University's Center for Research on Education Outcomes shows that while some charter schools perform better, many more perform about the same or slightly worse than public schools. The education research book, The Public School Advantage, shows that when private and public school students are compared side by side from similar economic backgrounds, public school students slightly outperform students from private schools. There are plenty of reports with strong claims that reforms are working, but that research is overwhelmingly paid for by reform supporters.
What we do know from very good, strong research, robust research over and over again, that what it takes to succeed is to have a highly trained teacher with a rigorous curriculum and sufficient resources to implement it. That's not as sexy as saying school choice. It's not as easy. It's much more complicated and really, really messy, but that's what works. And that's where we ought to be focusing our energies, on making sure that every kid has that available to them.